The controversy over nuclear testing. The Soviet Union has stopped testing and is abiding by a nuclear test ban, but the United States has continued to test weapons underground, claiming the Soviets have cheated. The administration says the Soviets tested weapons more powerful than agreed to in 1974, but have they?
Political specialist Roland Post and our Target 4 investigative unit spent the last month looking into it. They found the administration is ignoring evidence that the Soviets never cheated, that they're following the treaty. And Roland joins us now for a cover story. Roland?
Sylvia, what you are about to hear now is a story of political ideology and scientific truth and what happens when the two come into conflict. It's also a story of Soviet-American tensions and nuclear weapons. The key players in this drama are an Assistant Secretary of Defense named Richard Perle and a group of seismologists who have spent much of their careers working for the government. The issue has Richard Perle, because of his distrust of the Soviets, deliberately rejected and suppressed evidence.
If the scientific data doesn't quite agree with your political position, what is done is to bend the data a little bit.
Baloney. It's not a question of scientific evidence. It's a question of scientists playing politics.
The argument concerns underground testing of nuclear weapons. In 1974, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to a treaty that said each side could test nuclear weapons as long as the explosion didn't exceed 150 kilotons, which is still 10 times larger than the Hiroshima bomb.
I've looked carefully at the evidence and have concluded, as President Reagan did, that there is significant evidence the Soviets have violated the 150 kiloton threshold.
This has been the position of the administration since 1983, a position formed and spearheaded by Assistant Secretary of Defense Richard Perle. But it has also caused a rebellion among the very scientists the Defense Department relies on to estimate the size of the Soviet tests. So deep has been the controversy that last year the Defense Department secretly convened 3 groups of experts who monitor Soviet tests. They are seismologists, the same people who measure the size of earthquakes. The Target 4 interviewed some of those seismologists, and they all said the Soviet Union has not violated the 1974 test ban treaty. One of them is Dr. Charles Archambault, who has been monitoring the Soviets since the Eisenhower administration.
At present, there is no evidence that the Soviets have tested over 150 kilotons, none whatsoever.
Another is Professor Lynn Sykes, who negotiated the test ban treaty for the Nixon administration.
The treaty itself, it states that neither country shall test above 150 kilotons. And say, I have no evidence that indicates to me that the Soviets have done that.
Dr. Willard Hannon heads seismic monitoring for the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory.
I don't believe that the evidence supports a militarily significant violation.
The man who ultimately receives this advice is Richard Perle. His position is far different.
The best experts available spent years studying this and came to the conclusion that it was likely the Soviets have violated the 150 kilotons.
There are seismologists who have written, for instance, Dr. Charles Archambault, I believe you know him, wrote, at present there is no evidence that the Soviets have tested over 150 kilotons, none whatsoever.
Well, with all due respect, he's wrong. There's lots of evidence.
Dr. Lynn,
he may not be persuaded on the basis of the evidence, but to say there's no evidence is just flatly wrong.
Dr. Sykes, Lynn Sykes of Columbia, says the Soviet Union has not violated the 150 KT limit of the threshold treaty as alleged. He's wrong?
He's entitled to his opinion. He's a professor sitting up at Columbia.
But he is an authority on the issue, is he not?
Well, the seismology enables you to make an estimate as to the yield of an event. Even by that standard alone, there is evidence that suggests the Soviets have violated it, your experts notwithstanding.
They were your experts at one time. They worked for the Defense Department.
There is other evidence as well that of a sensitive and a classified nature.
Mr. Perle would only say the other evidence involves satellite and electronic surveillance. But Target 4's investigation learned that Mr. Perle had already convened a panel of experts which looked at this other evidence and rejected it.
You had Defense Intelligence Agency study not very long ago for precisely that, to evaluate seismic and non-seismic ways of determining what the Soviets are doing. And they still came up with the conclusion that seismology was the most accurate way.
They came to the conclusion that of the many ways of estimating yield, seismology was the single most important, and I happen to agree with that.
Even after acknowledging seismology is the best indicator, Mr. Perle then rejects it.
I didn't particularly care much what their answer was. It doesn't have any profound bearing on our policy.
Target 4's investigation has also uncovered evidence that Mr. Perle improperly tried to manipulate intelligence agencies in a biased direction. Example, a Perle letter to the Air Force when its intelligence unit asked seismologists to advise on Soviet nuclear tests. According to sources who have seen the letter, it said, "The intelligence community is undermining the administration's position. My department will control this area." I asked Perle about the letter.
There was a letter, I understand, that you wrote on April the 15th of last year to General Fatz, who's the Air Force Assistant Chief of Staff, I think, for Intelligence.
Used to be.
Used to be.
I don't remember the exact words of the letter, but my concern was the concern that I've been expressing to you throughout this interview, which is that we have tended, I think, wrongly to exclude the non-seismic evidence that bears on the estimation of the yield of Soviet tests.
When you cut through these disagreements, you find that the real issue may be more personal and political than scientific.
They're all seismologists. There's a bunch of seismologists feathering their own nest. Well, look, the seismologists have dominated this field from the beginning. It's how they make their living. The day that it is concluded that we can get along without attributing the importance to seismology that we do, some of these fellows are going to be looking for jobs.
The scientific opinion is close to, I'd say, close to unanimous. Right now, Mr. Perle finds it extremely difficult to find any scientist that will defend the DOD Perle position. And that's because there just aren't any that believe it.
I think that one view that is often put forth, and that is that arms control agreements are not in the best interests of the United States, that the Soviets will cheat, and then attempt to have a self-fulfilling prophecy by coming up with some procedure, an incorrect one, that indicates to them that the Soviets have cheated.
Well, a footnote, Massachusetts Congressman Edward Markey, whose committee has jurisdiction over nuclear agreements, is asked to see that letter from Perle to General Fatz, which the administration so far has been unwilling to release. And Willard Hannon, he was a seismologist at the Lawrence Livermore Lab. He was speaking as an individual, not as an official spokesman of the Lawrence Livermore Lab.
Absolutely stunning, Roland. We'll be looking forward to your follow-ups on this.
Yes, thank you.